couple of minutes ago. We're going to go live to the Kennedy Space Center at Cape Canaveral, Florida, where the National Transportation Safety Board is holding its first public viewing of some of the wreckage that has been recovered from the ocean floor from the Challenger disaster. Let's join in. This is a NTSB spokesman right now. Let's listen to what he has to say.
So, because when we go over there, there's going to be pretty poor acoustics in that area. And all of you will get a chance to go into the area where we have assembled all of the pieces that have been recovered and processed to date of the Challenger, with the exception of the crew compartment and the external tank, the frustrums from the two SRBs, and a couple of engine bells. And these are they're in two separate buildings, as you'll see. All of you will be able to go in there. However, because of the fact that it is easy to get equipment and people snagged on the debris, there'll only be a pool which will going into the back parts of that. However, Mr. ARMENTROUT will be telling you about what they will be seeing and what he will be pointing out to you. When we come back from the tour, then we will assemble back here in this room, and the people who have been part of the pool, the radio and the newspaper and the magazine reporters will report back. We will show the videotape that will be taken by the NASA crew that will be part of the pool, so that everybody will have a chance to get all of the information that everybody else has. As briefing, not be accepting questions or discussing the crew component. He will not be able to answer any questions about what conclusions that this leads one to, or to support any particular theories. With that, Mr. ARMENTROUT.
Thank you, Hugh. Good morning. On January 29th, NASA from the National Transportation Safety Board in conducting the investigation of the Challenger mishap. The Safety Board's chairman, Jim Burnett, agreed to provide technical assistance, and since that time, our continuous on-scene presence has been maintained in support of the effort. Because of Safety Board experience throughout the years with major accidents involving in-flight fires, in-flight explosions, in-flight aerodynamic breakups, in-flight collisions with the water, and our experience in deep water salvage techniques, and of course the follow-on necessity of reconstructing the wreckage for analysis, I was assigned the task of directing those related efforts. During the past 2.5 months, I can speak for myself and the rest of the task force members in saying that this investigation is a very complex structural task. We've made progress, and I've been asked by NASA to spend some time showing you the results of our work to date. A walkthrough tour of the full-scale modular mock-up of the orbiter in the external tank wreckage, along with related SRB and orbiter engine components, will follow this briefing. I will point out areas of specific interest where selected metallurgical and non-destructive testing and fracture analysis efforts have been employed. The external tank, which is the primary load-bearing structure of the shuttle prior to SRB separation, is one example of evidence that can be gained through the reconstruction technique. The orbiter, of course, is another, and I will point out specific examples in about 4 areas where all of you will be able to see just exactly where we are directing our efforts and where they are areas of high interest. The full-scale mock-up method, for any of you that are not familiar with it, is primarily an analysis technique that does not really have any equal. In-flight telemetry, of course, is an excellent tool, but as you know, it ceases to exist at about the moment of in-flight breakup and electrical power loss. One then must rely on photo optics and recorded radar data, which was available mishap. However, no matter how high a degree of confidence level one places on telemetry and optics and radar, the physical evidence must be considered as a key to its validation. Although the shuttle cannot, by any real stretch of the imagination, be considered a conventional aircraft, its wreckage to date during our examination does exhibit conventional overload and thermal distress characteristics. It also, of course, exhibits the water impact damage that one might expect. It also exhibits damage attributed to a long time on the floor of the sea. Many of the components that you'll see today, especially on the orbiter and on the ET, were recovered from the surface early on in the investigative days because of its buoyancy. And as you'll see, the buoyancy was provided by the thermal protective tiles, much of the honeycomb that the orbiter is made of, and also on the big external tank, the, as they call it, the spray-on foam insulation, or SOFI for short, that also caused it to float. That was fortunate for us. The other areas that sank and were recovered from the bottom of the sea are giving us a specifically hard time, and you'll see examples of that due to the marine life that adheres to it, and it has to be treated with various chemicals and various methods to remove the marine life to continue with the fracture analysis program. It also inhibits our chemical and wet and dry chemistry analysis. You'll see that, and we'll explain it and show it to you. The assistance that we have had primarily consisted initially of NASA engineering from the three various space centers. However, the structural expertise that we needed for this reconstruction did, in fact, come upon our request for participation from Rockwell, General Dynamics, Fairchild, Grumman, Martin Marietta, Morton Thiokol, Rocketdyne, and many of the other subcontractors.
What we are watching right here is a joint press briefing by NASA and the National Transportation Safety Board. This is will be preceding a special press tour of the two hangars where the remnants and the wreckage of the Space Shuttle Challenger, the debris that has been recovered from the ocean so far, some 12 to 14% of the actual Challenger, the orbiter, the SRBs, and the external tank have been reassembled. And the press will be taking a tour in a couple of minutes. More videotape from NASA and the NTSB is reportedly going to be released. And of course, we will have cameras there, and we'll be showing you what NASA and the NTSB show to us. And we will have further reports and updates on this continuing story from Cape Canaveral, Florida, and the Kennedy Space Center throughout the day here on CNN. And
reporters are getting a look at this hour at the recovered Challenger wreckage at Cape Canaveral.
This is Day Watch on CNN for Wednesday, April.
Transportation letting the public have a look at the Challenger wreckage for the first time today. Reporters are being briefed right now. They are to be allowed into hangars in just a few minutes from now to see the shuttle parts divers have pulled from the ocean. We will bring you pictures of the debris later today. Just a few minutes ago, NTSB investigator Terry Armentrout answered correspondent Al Sunshine's question about the status of the investigation.
Did you have any kind of indication to us about how the orbiter broke up, how much of it may have landed intact in water, and how much was broken up by the water itself?
So that, of course, has been the main thrust of our investigation. The orbiter itself, as you will see, exhibits certain fracture mechanics. Of course, the optics were deceiving in some regard because it appeared to all of us initially that there was a huge explosion and everything came down in tiny fragments. I'll let you draw some of your own visual conclusions while you're there, but that is what we're faced with is the recreation of how the orbiter broke up in flight.
A piece of the shuttle's tail was unloaded yesterday at Port Canaveral. Investigators hope it will give more clues to the explosion that shattered the shuttle in midair 2.5 months ago.
For the first time since the Challenger investigation began, officials have revealed the space shuttle's crew cabin was not destroyed by a huge explosion. An investigator with the National Transportation Safety Board says Challenger's crew cabin was intact when it hit the surface of the Atlantic Ocean. Terry ARMENTROUT's theory is the water impact or aerodynamic forces broke the shuttle apart and not the force of the explosion. CNN's Al Sunshine has a report.
Challenger's crew cabin was not blown apart by the fireball that encircled the shuttle's external tank. That, according to accident analysis experts with the National Transportation Safety Board. Since the January 28th disaster, much of this wreckage has been microscopically examined by board members who've been searching for the clues into what caused the shuttle to break up some 73 seconds after it was launched. NASA investigators say the accident was caused by the failure of a rocket joint on Challenger's right side booster. It was earlier believed the shuttle's huge external tank exploded, breaking up Challenger and killing its crew of 7. But according to NTSB investigators, most of the shuttle's wreckage shows no signs of being burned.
You do see a lot of damage to the tile, of course, but much of that, of course, we have to sort that out as to whether it occurred on the bottom. A lot of it occurred on impact. A lot of it occurred during the flexing of the material itself.
Was it apparently blown apart by the explosion, the initial fireball of the external tank?
The external tank?
This section here, was it blown apart by the external tank?
We don't have that evidence at this point.
It's now believed Challenger broke up high over Cape Canaveral because of the supersonic wind forces, aerodynamic loads, that tore apart the tumbling orbiter after the launch vehicle was destroyed. Challenger's orbiter was designed to withstand launch and landing stress only at specific angles. It broke apart as it tumbled through the upper atmosphere. Accident investigators still won't talk about what happened to Challenger's 7 astronauts, but they say large pieces of the shuttle nose, where the crew was seated, did apparently break off intact. That means the forward section of Challenger hit the water at speeds approaching 180 miles an hour, and that force is believed to be responsible for breaking apart Challenger's crew cabin from the rest of the shuttle. Experts say the astronauts were probably killed from the force of the initial blast.
The complex investigation into how the space shuttle broke up 73 seconds after it was launched from Cape Canaveral is not over yet. NTSB investigators say it will still be several weeks, if not even longer, before they have the full picture of exactly how Challenger was destroyed. Al Sunshine, CNN, at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida.
Federal investigators think they know how the Space Shuttle Challenger came apart when it fell from the sky over Cape Canaveral, Florida. These are their clues, pieces of the shuttle taken from the Atlantic Ocean floor and stored in a hangar at the Kennedy Space Center. Some pieces, such as the nose section, were relatively intact and showed no burn damage. That told investigators 2 things. The shuttle was not blown apart by a massive explosion, and the crew cabin, contained within the nose section, was intact when it hit the surface of the ocean. Investigators believe the shuttle hit the water at about 140 to 180 miles an hour, shattering upon impact.
A federal safety expert helping NASA investigate the space shuttle disaster said today that the Challenger's crew cabin remained intact after the explosion until it hit the water. That expert, Terry ARMENTROUT, led reporters through 2 hangars at Cape Canaveral where the recovered wreckage of the Challenger has been laid out over grids. It was the first time the debris was public. NASA's experts say they believe the astronauts were killed by the explosion or by aerodynamic forces as the cabin fell 9 miles before hitting the water.
Presidential Commission member today is scheduled to inspect the most important piece of the shuttle wreckage found so far. It's a huge piece of Challenger's right side rocket booster with a 2-foot hole. The piece recovered off of Florida contains the part of the booster joint that ruptured just before Challenger exploded. Investigators hope it will show why the joint failed. An aerospace magazine reports the Soviet Union has entered the flight phase of its shuttle program. Aviation Week in Space Technology says the Soviets are conducting landing tests. It reports the Soviet shuttle is released from the back of a jet. The tests are similar to those conducted by NASA in 1977 for the U.S. shuttle program. continue their tests on a two-ton section of the Space Shuttle Challenger's right booster rocket. The wreckage includes a large hole that apparently burned through during the disaster. There are indications that the divers have also recovered additional remains of the Challenger crew.
What appeared to be was taken off a NASA recovery ship off the Florida coast last night. Correspondent Al Sunshine reports on the latest in the shuttle search.
The NASA recovery ship GW Pierce pulled into Port Canaveral shortly after 10:30 Tuesday night. Even before the ship pulled into port, it was met by a military ambulance signaling the recovery of more remains from Challenger's crew. The Pierce had spent all day Tuesday working the ocean's floor some 38 miles offshore from Cape Canaveral, the wreckage site of the shuttle's crew cabin. Shortly after the ship arrived, two men carried what appeared to be a metallic coffin aboard the Pierce. It took 4 men to carefully carry it off and solemnly place it aboard the waiting ambulance. It's believed the coffin was taken to the Life Sciences Unit at Canaveral Air Force Base, Hangar L, the site where autopsies have been performed on Challenger's astronauts. NASA continues to refuse comment on crew recovery efforts, but it's believed they've recovered remains from all of Challenger's astronauts. NASA sources indicate crew cabin recovery efforts may soon be ending, but there's no indication when the bodies of the Challenger astronauts may be moved for final burial. Al Sunshine, CNN, Port Canaveral.
NASA officials today sent their preliminary conclusions on the Challenger's disaster to the presidential panel investigating it. Boxes of documents left Cape Canaveral for Washington, where the commission is headquartered. NASA spokesman Hugh Harris said most of the information already has been made public during hearings since the January 28th explosion. Much of the material is believed to support the prevalent theory that the shuttle's right booster rocket leaked explosive gases and flame, triggering the fireball.
In its preliminary findings on the Challenger explosion, the study is now in the hands of the president. That done, the space agency released dramatic videotape of the space shuttle's final moments.
The NASA showed debris from the shattered rocket and orbiter, including what is his cabin, falling into the sea.
Anybody see the shuttle? It impacted the orbiter? Apparently so. They're sending boats out.
The cabin, separated in the explosion, plummeted nearly 9 miles before disappearing in a flash of orange flame. Aviation Week and Space Technology magazine reports that some of the 7 crew members may have been conscious and aware of the crisis in the minutes after the explosion. The ocean search for the remains of the shuttle crew officially ended yesterday. Remains of each crew member, including teacher Christa McAuliffe, have been recovered and will be families. Those own investigation were delivered to the Presidential Commission on deadline this week. The commission is expected to blame the disaster on the failure of a fuel segment joint in the shuttle's right-hand booster rocket. The burn patterns on this piece of wreckage confirm that the trouble started almost immediately after the Challenger was launched. Failure of the booster joint allowed flames to escape, leading to the explosion of the main external rocket. But exactly why the joint failed, because of cold weather, defective material, or something else, remains uncertain.
I think there were many things wrong with that joint, or many design features of that joint that could have been a contributor.
I don't believe it's ever going to be exactly which of those different things caused the actual accident. I don't believe we need to really know that. What we really weaknesses of the joint are, so that in a new design, we know what to get rid of.
The Presidential Commission has until June 1st to file its final report. For the Week in Review, I'm Pat Etheridge.
NASA says the remains of all 7 Challenger astronauts have now been recovered. That announcement comes 6 weeks after Navy salvage divers discovered Challenger's crew cabin on the ocean's bottom. CNN's Tom McNair now reports from the Cape.
The Navy ship USS Opportune sat tied to the pier Saturday. A large crane loaded a miniature submarine aboard as the vessel switched from recovering the bodies of the astronauts to locating remaining pieces of shuttle debris.
Remains of each of the 7 Space Shuttle Challenger crew members have been recovered. Final forensic work and future planning in accordance with family desires is expected to be completed in the next several days. and will be announced when appropriate.
The announcement by NASA follows 6 long weeks of self-imposed silence by space agency officials. Since the crew compartment was first located on March 7th, and despite the number of ambulances that arrived and departed a Navy pier to pick up remains, the status of recovering the bodies of the astronauts have been ruled off limits during interviews with NASA officials. Most information on identification of the astronauts has come from the families. Marvin Resnik, the father of astronaut Judith Resnik, told reporters in New York Saturday that he's been told NASA will send the astronauts' remains from the Kennedy Space Center to an Air Force mortuary in Dover, Delaware. Mr. Resnik says it may be another 2 weeks before the remains will be turned over to the families for cremation or burial. The book may be closed on recovery efforts for the astronauts' remains, but salvage ships will continue working for NASA a bit longer.
We still have recovery operations to do out there. We have additional pieces of orbiter debris that we would like to locate and recover, and there are several pieces of solid rocket booster that are rigged for recovery that we have yet to pull up out of the water.
The primary will center on the bottom half of this joint of the right solid rocket booster. Investigators hope to put the 2 pieces together to shed some light on the exact cause of the explosion. While the recovery effort continues at sea, another part of the investigation is now underway in this large building behind me. Workmen are slowly taking apart 2 solid rocket boosters that were scheduled for the next shuttle launch. It is hoped between the evidence recovered from the ocean bottom and whatever is learned from the unused rockets will fit together to form a detailed explanation of what went wrong, but more specifically, why. Tom Intier, CNN at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida.
It has been a nagging question, isn't it? Just how might the astronauts on board the Space Shuttle Challenger have actually died? In the explosion, or when the shuttle's crew compartment finally hit the ocean? Today, the space agency has released yet another set of pictures, and ABC's Lynn Scher has been looking at them.
The explosion happened so quickly it was impossible at first to identify individual parts falling to Earth. But new still photos taken by a 70mm tracking camera and released in response to media requests show the crew cabin as it broke away from the orbiter. The pictures follow its emergence from the clouds and the beginning of its 8-mile plunge to the ocean. In a written release accompanying the photos, NASA insists, quote, there is not enough detail available to ascertain the integrity of the cabin. In other words, whether it was indeed intact and whether the 7 crew members may have been alive or even conscious. But a source close to the investigation of the Challenger accident told ABC News that the word intact is a poor choice, that while it appears the whole cabin broke away from the vehicle, the skin might have been ripped, and the forces that tore the orbiter apart likely disabled the systems enabling the astronauts inside to breathe. That is some of what they hope to find out from analysis of the debris brought up from the ocean floor and from other data they are examining. NASA still has more pictures they have not yet released. Some are enhancements of the pictures they gave out today. Others, the frames that fill in the blanks between them. All have been seen by at least some members of the Presidential Commission. And ABC News has learned that they decided not to show some of them at a public hearing in order to avoid premature speculation on how the astronauts died, and in order to save the families some anguish. But NASA has still not explained why, after repeated requests, those pictures are not now being made public. Lynn Scher, ABC News, Kennedy Space Center, Florida.
And for Wednesday, April 23rd. With Reed Collins in Washington, Bob Kane in Atlanta, and Lynn Brown in New York.
Good morning. The New York Times this morning disclosed that NASA and its contractors have wasted billions of taxpayers' dollars on the space shuttle and other programs. The source of this story, federal audits the Times obtained under the Freedom of Information Act. These audits show the losses occurred despite warnings by government inspectors that bad management was costing a lot of money. Looking at some details of the audits at NASA, the Times estimates the total waste on all space agency projects amounts to at least $3.5 billion. It should be pointed out, however, the audits do not always give dollar figures. The audits found the space agency spent as much as $1 billion more than it needed for the new tracking and data relay satellite system. The audit said hundreds of millions of dollars were lost through the failure of NASA to enforce contracts on a wide variety of projects. And they found that millions of dollars in NASA equipment were lost because it simply disappeared, either lost or stolen. NASA officials say the audits have been, for the most part, fair and accurate. Federal auditors say Dr. James FLETCHER, who headed NASA in the 1970s and is now nominated to take over the agency once more, misled Congress and the public about the costs of the shuttle program. Fletcher denies that accusation, but does say he was, quote, over-optimistic about the program's costs. The Senate Commerce Committee is holding confirmation hearings today on the Fletcher nomination, and CNN plans to cover portions of those hearings live. The Reagan administration has been expected to ask the Congress to allocate some new funding to help pay for a new space shuttle replacing the Challenger, which was destroyed shortly after takeoff January 28th. Now there is a new twist. Sources say a National Security Council group recommends another way to pay for another new shuttle. It wants the president to finance construction out of the savings from other programs that may not be related to the space program. These sources say Mr. Reagan's not made a decision. More federal audits are disclosed, posing questions whether the space agency did enough for the safety of the space shuttle program and the astronauts who fly the orbiters.
This is Daywatch on CNN for Thursday, April 24th. With Reed Collins in Washington, Mary Ann Laughlin and Bob Kane in Atlanta, and Lynn Brown in New York.
Good morning. More revelations today that suggest the space agency has seen years of waste and mismanagement. Yesterday at this hour, we reported federal auditors had found that NASA had wasted billions of dollars in developing the space shuttle and other programs. The New York Times, using the Freedom of Information Act, reports today in its second report, auditors have concluded that NASA did not spend some money on the shuttle that it should have or could have. The auditors said that NASA shortchanged the shuttle program $500 million in safety testing, design, and development. This despite years of warnings from auditors and aerospace experts. The audits also concluded that faulty welds done on the Challenger were concealed by one subcontractor who falsified X-rays to avoid repair costs, although the subcontractor was caught. It was discovered that Johnson Space Center had failed to detect critical equipment flaws that could cause the loss of life or destruction of the shuttle. The Times goes on to say the audits indicated NASA had misled the Congress about the costs and the schedule for the shuttle and other programs. And it's concluded the space agency spent billions of dollars on shuttle equipment that had not been thoroughly tested. The NASA concedes these audits have been fair, generally accurate. However, in a statement, the space agency does say the audits cover programs and activities of several years ago, and that many of the problems cited in the audits were detected by NASA and corrected. Despite the revelations of the past 2 days, the man who had headed NASA in the 1970s and who has been reappointed to that job feels things aren't all that bad at the space agency. Dr. James Fletcher commented at his Senate confirmation hearing.
I can only comment generally, particularly on those things that happened after I left the agency in 1977. All I can say is that in talking to the Inspector General that made those studies, she indicated that from her perception, NASA was perhaps the best run agency of the federal government.
Dr. Fletcher did say the allegations of waste and mismanagement must be investigated, and he assured the members of the Senate Commerce Committee he would do whatever is needed to put the space agency on course. Committee members said they are satisfied that Fletcher can do that job. Fletcher also said the destruction of the Challenger has presented the space agency with its biggest challenge in its 28-year history. The anguish caused by the loss of the shuttle and its 7-person crew hit home again yesterday, when NASA released new pictures showing the Challenger's cabin tumbling through the sky after the explosion. These pictures have led some investigators to believe the crew may have been alive and perhaps even conscious as the shuttle plunged toward the ocean. CNN's Al Sunshine.
Videotapes of the huge fireball that engulfed Challenger on January 28th never showed enough detail to see what actually happened to the doomed space shuttle. But some members of the Presidential Commission were recently shown high-speed photographs of Challenger moments after it broke up some 9 miles above the Kennedy Space Center. After seeing those specially enhanced pictures, investigators believed Challenger's crew was not subjected to violent enough G-forces to knock them unconscious or kill them. For the first time, NASA publicly released those pictures Wednesday evening. The photographs are grainy and greatly enlarged. They clearly show large pieces of the space shuttle as it fell through the sky. NASA spokesman refused to point out Challenger's crew cabin on camera, but did indicate which large piece in each photograph is Challenger's forward fuselage containing the shuttle's crew compartment and 7 astronauts. Accident investigators several weeks ago said the shuttle's forward section broke apart nearly intact and shattered after it hit the ocean following a 9-mile fall. NASA still declines to comment on how Challenger's crew were killed, but it's now believed some of the Challenger astronauts may have been conscious and aware of the disaster as the forward section of Challenger fell from the sky. NASA confirmed last week it had recovered all the remains it could find from the shuttle's 7 astronauts. It's believed pathology tests are nearly complete, and NASA expects to release the bodies of the Challenger astronauts to their families for burial sometime next week. Al Sunshine, CNN, at the Kennedy.
7 hearses will carry the bodies of the Challenger astronauts from Cape Canaveral's Life Science Building through the Kennedy Space Center, starting at about 8:30 Tuesday morning. The motorcade will wind past the launch complex, where the shuttle mission began 12 weeks ago. NASA employees are being allowed time off from work to observe the motorcade. It will end up at the shuttle landing facility, where Challenger would have touched down on February 3rd.
The ambulances which will pull up at the site of the plane will be unloaded by military personnel from Patrick Air Force Base. An astronaut crew member will escort each of the caskets into the plane and will remain with them all the way to Dover.
NASA has lost 15 astronauts, including Challenger 7, since 1964. Prior to the shuttle disaster, the worst accident was the 1967 Apollo fire that killed astronauts Virgil Grissom, Edward White, and Roger Chaffee. NASA has set up a small memorial honoring all its astronauts who gave their lives furthering the exploration of space. Shortly after the Challenger disaster, NASA erected a small plaque and picture of the shuttle's 7 astronauts inside the Visitor Center. It's been a popular attraction, but there will be no public viewing of the Challenger motorcade as it leaves here Tuesday morning. Final burial of Challenger's crew is expected over the next several days, to be arranged by the astronauts' families. Al Sunshine, CNN, at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida.
Investigators determine how or when the astronauts died, although he says they were subjected to extremely large forces as the shuttle broke up and fell into the ocean.